So, with season 3 of Harley Quinn set to debut at the end of this month, of course we all, well, let me rephrase this. Let me rewind here. Okay, what I'm trying to say is we all know that season 3 of Harley Quinn comes out at the end of this month. And we know because of the end of last season that her and Ivy are an item just like they are in the comics. Or at least some interpretations of the comics, we know they are an item. But speaking of Poison Ivy, I've always been curious about one thing. Now, we know that if we go and watch the crossover film between Ninja Turtles and Batman, we know that when she got mutated, she became basically a Venus flytrap, that got rooted into the ground. She was basically a Venus flytrap tree, rooted into the ground with her hands turned into additional mouths for her to bite with and everything. So we know basically what her mutation would basically be like, if she was fully mutated, like how far it's willing to transform her plant-wise, even if it's permanent or temporary. But here's a question I have. Now, we know in Harley Quinn, Ivy died once or twice and was basically reborn. She was basically regrowed into herself again. So we know, depending on the interpretation of Ivy, we know that she can basically be resurrected, even after she's killed. She can basically be, reborn, and like I said, as herself again, maybe more powerful and stronger than ever. And we kind of get an idea that that's maybe one of the directions they're heading in with the third season. Not necessarily killing her off, but basically, making her more powerful than she was prior. And I do apologize, I just got off work a little while ago, I'm a little tired, which is why I'm kind of fumbling a little bit with the wording here. But like I said, we kind of get an idea that maybe we're going to get a similar situation in season 3. Not necessarily her dying, but mainly her becoming more powerful than she's been in the past. But it does make you wonder about one thing. It does make you curious about one thing. Now, we know comic books, like to always, I guess you could say create a list. They like to create a list of characters they potentially want to, I guess you could say, off, for the time being, for some time, maybe a few years before bringing them back, or potentially off them permanently. In other words, end their existence in the comic and go forward in another direction. And with Ivy, here's a character that, well, depending on how you look at it, potentially could go out in a way that maybe she's cool with, that she has no problem with because, well, her connection with plants, her connection with nature. And one would have to wonder how that could be, what potentially could be the way Ivy is ousted in the book. What potential way could she be ousted in the book? And the reason I bring this up is because I was watching a video that was done, I think, about a year or so ago, talking about, basically talking about and asking, of who Poison Ivy is. And basically, the person that hosted the video showcased a lot of different interpretations of the character throughout her existence and how much she has evolved depending on certain interpretations. But, with that said, even though I haven't watched the whole thing, entirely, it does bring up the question of, how would she, go out? Like, if DC Comics decided they wanted to out, Poison Ivy once and for all, how would she go out? And like I mentioned, I think she would go out in a way that she'd be cool with, she'd be happy with, because at least she would finally be at peace, if you kind of see what I'm saying. But how would that be, you might ask? Well, like I said, with the crossover movie and story that they did with Ninja Turtles and Batman, if that gave us any clue, I think Poison Ivy wouldn't mind going out, as a plant. I mean, let's be honest. When she died in Harley Quinn, she was buried into the ground. Essentially, they had seeded her into the ground to be reborn. And that's what happened. But what if Ivy decides, the way she's going to go out is finally turn to the side of good? Well, not necessarily turn to the side of good, but basically, realize that the only way to probably save the planet, and even though she cares about, like, let's say Harley, that the best thing to do is to truly sacrifice herself for good. And one of the best ways to do that is to truly become one with nature. And I look at the fact that if they were to eventually, DC Comics that is, and Warner Brothers, were to eventually, down the line, because, again, comic book companies, even if they're divisions of major conglomerates, will always make decisions that they feel are necessary. Decisions that, although they may not affect different interpretations of certain comics that they're publishing, from a movie standpoint or a television show standpoint, that as far as the official comics are concerned, like the mainstream ones, their decision will definitely have an effect. Now you might say, well, Poison Ivy appears in other stuff. That is true. But we're talking like mainstream Batman, like the main Batman books and everything in which she's connected with. And, books that she appears in with Harley and appears in with Catwoman that have that connection to the main Batman book. I'm talking along those lines of, her being taken out having, a huge effect, if you catch my drift on those comics. And again, you have to wonder exactly, how would they position her to do that? And again, like I said, I think the way they would position her is if basically she does make the ultimate sacrifice to not only save the nature, save the earth she truly cares about, but to also save those that she cares about as well, like Harley and maybe even to an extent Batman and his crew. But again, you wonder, well, how would she do that? Because, I mentioned her becoming one with nature. I could see her literally, and this is my personal point of view. I could see her literally, embracing her true power, like her true ultimate, secret last resort weapon, if you will, that she has within her, that she's kept hidden within her, and never really want to let loose unless the last resort is needed. I mean, you could say that we've probably seen hints of it, and that is true. But I'm talking along the lines of really, lashing out, letting it out, and as a result, it, basically takes her out of the fray, takes her out of the picture for good, as a living character. And the way I see it is she could, if DC Comics decided to do it, could sacrifice herself by being turned into a tree. She could be turned into a tree, she could be turned into multiple poison ivy, vines and everything that surround certain areas, like where Harley is, to protect her and stuff, and that would be it. Like her sanctuary, like she wants to protect Harley and Batman and them, and she might do something like that. We don't know, but I could see more along the lines option A being a direction, because again, again, she could have this power, that she's holding within as a last resort, to where when she unleashes it, not only does it end her existence, as a living person, if you will, but it allows her to evolve into something more, basically finally become truly one with nature, by being a tree that, you could showcase, once in a while, with Harley Quinn and maybe Batman and them visiting it, and it kind of speaking to it as if it is her. Well, it is her, but as if, they're talking to her as a living being, but knowing that, she's stuck now in this state permanently as a tree, or as a wall of poison ivy-like vines. But again, that's just my personal opinion and point of view of how I see, poison ivy's existence as a living person, if you will, plant girl, if you will, coming to an end if they, if DC Comics ever decided to pull the trigger. I could see that happening. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely I could be wrong, because, if they wanted to pull the trigger, they would have done it, long ago. But they didn't. They didn't pull the trigger. But, again, this is just a point of view, that I'm kind of thinking about. My cable nearly got tangled there on my bag, on my shopping bag. But again, this is just an opinion that I'm thinking about, because when you get down to it, if you want to believe anything about DC Comics' future, then I would not put it past them to say, okay, well, if we're going to try to salvage Batman's comic series, if we're going to try to, like I said, we're going to try to salvage Batman's comic series, if we're going to try to salvage, any spin-off series, then maybe we need to do something that's going to shock people and make it permanent. Remember, when Marvel did what they did with Gwen Stacy, a lot of people expected Gwen to come back, and technically she did at times, but it was a clone and all that, but they basically kept her death permanent. And, they would acknowledge it. They would actually have the character go back and visit, the resting place of the character they've killed off and made permanent. They would do that. They would actually do that. And for someone like Poison Ivy, but for a company like DC to do that, maybe with Batman and characters in that, I could see them doing it. I could potentially see them doing it. And again, it makes you curious, if Poison Ivy is that character that's chosen to go out permanently, not just a temporary death and she gets revived like in the Harley Quinn series, but permanently, how would it happen? And again, I think it happens with her unleashing some kind of power that she's kept hidden inside, that results in her truly becoming one with the earth and the nature that she loves. And thus, as a result, she either turns into a huge, conglomerate of poison ivy-like vines that protects the sanctuary, the home where she and Harley, reside and everything. And basically, she's there with Harley all the time. It's just a group of vines that, can understand Harley and just, helps Harley out, like opens doors, does this, does that, but that's it. Or she ends up becoming a big old tree that gets rooted into the ground like her Venus flytrap mutation form in the crossover film of TMNT and Batman. but but she remains that way, thus ending her existence as a living person, and allowing her to truly evolve and become one with nature, and thus allow her to still kind of be around, but basically now as a tree, to where, let's say, Harley visits, the Batman and Robin at times, Nightwing, Batgirl visit, Catwoman visits to talk to, as if they're talking to Ivy as a living person, but they're just talking to Ivy as the tree she's become. That potentially could be something that happens too. But what do you guys think? Do you think DC Comics would do it? And if they do decide to do something like that in the future, how do you think they will have Poison Ivy go out? Do you think it'll be the two ways I described? And out of the two, which one would you think will be the most satisfactory and permanent for her character if this decision was ever made? Let me know down below in the comments, as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Super thanks will be enabled after the video premiere. Super chats and super thick stickers will be enabled in the live chat during the